I still remember the weight of that moment. The way the sun beat down on Fort Bragg that Wednesday morning, the parade ground shimmering with heat as I stood at attention outside my quarters. My uniform was crisp, my posture perfect, the result of years of discipline and dedication. But despite the sweat trickling down my spine, I felt a chill when Colonel Reynolds approached, his nephew Private, Jason Reynolds trailing behind him like a smug shadow. Something in the colonel's stride told me this wasn't a routine visit. The way the other soldiers slowed their pace to watch, the peculiar silence that fell over our usually bustling section of the base. Captain Carter, his voice cut through the air, deliberately loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Not a greeting, an announcement. Sir. My salute was automatic, practiced thousands of times. He didn't return it immediately, letting my arm hang there a beat too long. A small power play that didn't go unnoticed by the gathering audience of my fellow soldiers. Pack your things, Captain Carter. Each word dropped like a stone. My nephew, Private Jason Reynolds, will be taking your quarters from now on. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, could practically hear the thoughts racing through their minds. Captain Emily Carter, 4 years of distinguished service, 2 tours in Afghanistan, being publicly stripped of her quarters for a private who'd barely finished basic training 3 months ago. Private Reynolds didn't even try to hide his smirk as he shifted his duffel bag from one shoulder to the other. Don't worry, Captain. I'll take good care of the place. I kept my face neutral, though my cheeks burned with humiliation. These quarters were my sanctuary, earned through rank and service. The small garden I'd started outside the back door. The photographs of my late father, a career Army sergeant, carefully arranged on the mantel. The sense of home I'd created in a life defined by movement and duty. Sir, may I ask the reason for this reassignment? I kept my voice steady, professional. Colonel Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Are you questioning a direct order, Captain? No, sir. Requesting clarification, sir. The base housing situation is being reorganized. Private Reynolds requires quarters befitting his position in the communications division. Your new assignment will be in Block D. You have until 1800 hours today. He finally returned my salute, a dismissive flick of his hand. That will be all. I stood frozen as he turned to walk away, his nephew already heading toward my door, fumbling with the keys the colonel had somehow procured. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the gathered soldiers like wildfire. I didn't argue, didn't plead. I did what soldiers are trained to do. I saluted quietly and stepped aside, but deep inside, shame burned hotter than fire. Carter. Staff Sergeant Michaels approached cautiously after the colonel was out of sight. That's not right. Everyone knows it. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Reynolds has been pulling strings for his nephew since day one, she continued, anger evident in her usually calm voice. But this crosses a line. It's just quarters, Michaels. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. It's not just quarters, and you know it. It's about respect. About the way things are supposed to work around here. She lowered her voice. You should report this. I shook my head. And tell them what? That a colonel exercised his authority? That I don't like it? That's not how the Army works. It's not how it's supposed to work either. Michaels's eyes narrowed. This isn't the end of this, Emily. But as far as I was concerned, it was. I spent the next several hours methodically packing my belongings, folding uniforms that no longer felt quite as proud on my shoulders, carefully wrapping the photographs of my father, gathering the few personal items that transformed standard issue quarters into something resembling a home. When I arrived at Block D, a cramped, neglected building on the far side of the base, I found a room half the size of my previous quarters, with peeling paint and a persistent smell of mildew. The kind of quarters typically assigned to newly arrived privates, not captains with my record. That night, lying on the thin mattress that creaked with every breath, I stared at the water stain on the ceiling and thought about my father's words from years ago when I'd told him I wanted to follow in his footsteps. The Army isn't always fair, Emily, but it's always watching who stands tall when things aren't fair. I'd always believed that, had built my career on it, had held on to my integrity when others cut corners, had maintained my discipline when others faltered, had earned every commendation and promotion through merit alone. But now, for the first time, I wondered if my father had been wrong. If all that mattered in the end was who you knew, whose blood ran in your veins, whose favor you curried. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I made a decision. I would endure this humiliation with dignity. I would continue to perform my duties with excellence. I would not give Colonel Reynolds the satisfaction of seeing me break. What I didn't know, couldn't know, was that the seeds of justice had already been planted. That fate, or perhaps something more deliberate, was already turning the wheel that would bring truth to light in a way I never could have orchestrated myself. But that revelation would have to wait. For now, there was only the quiet indignity of unpacking my life into a room that felt like punishment, and the burning determination not to let Colonel Reynolds see that he had succeeded in hurting me. Because some battles aren't won with weapons or words. Some battles are won simply by refusing to be defeated. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my body stiff from the uncomfortable mattress. The thin walls of Block D did little to muffle the sounds of other soldiers preparing for the day, a cacophony of running water and boots on concrete that never penetrated my previous quarters. I dressed with mechanical precision, each button and fold a reminder of who I was. Captain Emily Carter, not just some officer who could be shuffled aside at a colonel's whim. My uniform was my armor, my rank, earned through blood and sacrifice, not handed down through family connections. The mess hall felt unusually quiet when I entered. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Eyes flicked toward me, then quickly away. News traveled fast on base. Everyone knew. Captain! Lieutenant Rivera slid onto the bench across from me, her tray clattering against the metal table. Permission to speak freely? I nodded, forcing down a spoonful of bland oatmeal. This base is buzzing about what happened. Most of us are on your side. She leaned forward. Reynolds has gone too far this time. I appreciate the sentiment, Lieutenant, but there are no sides here, just orders. My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. With all due respect, that's bullshit. Rivera's voice dropped to a fierce whisper. You know it, I know it, and every soldier with half a brain knows it. The colonel's been favoring his nephew since he arrived. Private Reynolds failed his first 2 field assessments, but somehow those reports disappeared. He was late for duty 3 times last month, but no disciplinary action. And now this? I set my spoon down carefully. Lieutenant, did you know he's already moved all his friends into your quarters? They were drinking and playing music until 0200 last night. Martinez had to threaten them with a report before they quieted down. The image stung more than I wanted to admit. Strangers contaminating the space I'd made my own, disrespecting the home I'd created. I pushed the thought away. What do you expect me to do about it? I asked, genuinely curious. Rivera looked at me like I'd suggested we paint the tanks pink. Fight back. File a complaint. Take it up the chain of command. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about every soldier who's worked their ass off only to watch someone else get handed what they deserve. Her words hit close to home, echoing thoughts that had kept me awake most of the night. But I'd spent enough time in the military to know how things worked. And who exactly would I complain to? Colonel Reynolds oversees housing assignments. His direct superior is Colonel Peterson, his former roommate from West Point. The system is designed to handle battlefield emergencies and strategic decisions, not personal grievances. This isn't personal, it's a matter of principle, Rivera insisted. I stood, gathering my tray. I appreciate your concern, Lieutenant, but I need to focus on my duties. As I walked away, Rivera called after me, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Your father wouldn't have backed down. I froze mid-step, my grip tightening on the tray. She wasn't wrong. Sergeant First Class William Carter had been known for his unwavering principles, for standing up when others sat down. The memory of him, tall and straight-backed, even in his final days, flashed painfully through my mind. But my father had also taught me about choosing your battles, about the difference between bravery and foolishness, about patience. The morning passed in a blur of training exercises and paperwork. I threw myself into my duties, finding temporary solace in the familiar rhythms of military life. But the whispers followed me everywhere. Some sympathetic, others curious, a few even suggesting I must have done something to deserve such treatment. At 1400 hours, I had the misfortune of encountering Private Reynolds himself. He was lounging outside the communications building with 2 other privates, laughing loudly as I approached. Attention! I called out automatically. The other 2 privates jumped to their feet. Reynolds took his time, stretching lazily before assuming a mockery of the proper stance. Captain Carter? His smile didn't reach his eyes. How's Block D treating you? I hear the showers only have cold water most days. I ignored the bait. Private Reynolds, your uniform is out of regulation. Fix it immediately. He glanced down at his unbuttoned collar, then back up at me with a shrug. My uncle says I have a natural leadership style. Says too much focus on regulations stifles initiative. Your uncle isn't here right now, I replied evenly. But I am, and I'm ordering you to correct your uniform. Something ugly flashed across his face before he slowly, deliberately buttoned his collar. Better? He asked, voice dripping with insolence. Marginally. I moved to walk past them. Don't take it. Personally, Captain, he called after me. Blood runs thicker than rank around here. You'll figure that out eventually. I kept walking, each step measured and controlled, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me react. But his words followed me, settling into the pit of my stomach like stones. That evening, I made the mistake of walking past my old quarters. The lights were on, music, blaring through the open windows. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see several young soldiers sprawled across my furniture, boots on my coffee table, beer cans littering surfaces I'd kept meticulously clean. Quite the party, isn't it? I turned to find Staff Sergeant Michaels standing behind me, her expression grim. I was just passing by, I said, embarrassed to be caught staring. They're not even trying to hide it. She shook her head in disgust. Reynolds is flaunting his connection, making sure everyone knows he's untouchable. He's young, inexperienced. I found myself making excuses, though I wasn't sure why. He's an entitled brat who's never had to earn anything in his life, Michaels corrected. And his uncle is enabling behavior that would get any other soldier disciplined or discharged. I sighed, suddenly tired beyond words. What's your point, Sergeant? My point is that in 2 weeks, General Robert Anderson will be here for the annual inspection. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. And unlike Colonel Reynolds, the general has a reputation for being a stickler for rules and proper procedure. I felt a flicker of something. Not quite hope, but perhaps its distant cousin. The general can't micromanage housing assignments. No, Michaels agreed, but he can review documentation. And proper procedure requires that all housing reassignments be filed with official paperwork and justification. For the first time since Colonel Reynolds had delivered his crushing order, I felt a small spark of possibility ignite within me. You think the colonel didn't file the proper paperwork? I asked quietly. Michael's smile widened. I know he didn't, because I checked. The 2 weeks before General Anderson's inspection crawled by with excruciating slowness. I maintained my professional demeanor, executing my duties with precision while enduring the increasingly unbearable conditions in Block D. The pipes groaned at night, the roof leaked during a 3-day rainstorm, and the communal bathroom was a nightmare I wouldn't inflict on my worst enemy. Meanwhile, Colonel Reynolds seemed emboldened by his successful power play. He assigned me to additional duties that kept me working late into the evenings. Inventory counts, equipment inspections, tasks typically delegated to junior officers. If I completed them too quickly, he found more. If I showed the slightest sign of fatigue, he questioned my fitness for command. You look tired, Captain Carter, he remarked one morning after I'd spent the night battling a cockroach infestation in my quarters. Perhaps the responsibilities of your rank are becoming too much for you. I'm more than capable of handling my duties, sir, I replied, standing straighter despite the exhaustion weighing on my shoulders. We'll see about that. His smile never reached his eyes. I've assigned you to oversee the supply warehouse reorganization before the general's inspection. I expect it completed by 600 tomorrow. The entire warehouse, sir? I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. The supply warehouse was a cavernous building that hadn't been properly organized in years. That's typically a week-long project with a full team. Are you refusing an order, Captain? No, sir, I'll have it done. I spent that night moving crates, cataloging equipment, and reorganizing shelves that hadn't been touched in years. By morning, my uniform was stained with dust and grease, my hands raw from the labor. But the warehouse gleamed with military precision, every item in its place, every shelf labeled, every piece of equipment accounted for. When Colonel Reynolds inspected it at 0600 sharp, his frown told me he'd expected, perhaps hoped, that I would fail. Acceptable, was all he said before walking away. I allowed myself a small moment of satisfaction. It wasn't a victory exactly, but it wasn't a defeat either. As the inspection drew nearer, Private Reynolds became increasingly arrogant, strutting around the base like he owned it, his uniform violations more flagrant, his disregard for protocol more obvious. He started calling me Captain Homeless when he thought I couldn't hear, a nickname that quickly spread among his circle of friends. 4 days before the general's arrival, I was returning to Block D after a particularly long shift, when I overheard Reynolds in the mess hall holding court with several other privates. My uncle says she's on her way out anyway, he was saying loudly, not bothering to lower his voice. Says she's too soft for command. The housing thing was just the first step in showing her the door. But Captain Carter has a solid record, one of the other soldiers replied. 2 tours, multiple commendations. Reynolds snorted. Records can be adjusted. Trust me, by this time next month, you'll be calling me Sergeant Reynolds. He leaned in, voice dropping just enough that I had to strain to hear. My uncle's already put in the paperwork. Says I have natural leadership qualities. I slipped away before they noticed me, my mind racing. If Reynolds was to be believed, and his confidence suggested he was, Colonel, Reynolds wasn't just playing favorites with housing. He was actively undermining my career while fast-tracking his nephew. The realization should have filled me with anger, but instead I felt a strange calm descend over me. This had moved beyond personal humiliation. This was about the integrity of the system I had dedicated my life to upholding. The night before General Anderson's arrival, staff, Sergeant Michaels found me in the small garden I'd started outside Block D, a few potted plants salvaged from my old quarters, arranged to catch the evening sun. Carter, she said without preamble, I've got something you should see. She handed me a folder containing photocopies of housing assignment forms. I flipped through them slowly, understanding dawning as I reached the last page. This is the official record of my housing assignment, I said quietly. Never rescinded or amended. Michaels nodded. The colonel never filed any paperwork for the reassignment. According to official records, you're still the only legal resident of those quarters. He just took your keys and gave them to his nephew. How did you get these? Let's just say I have friends in the housing office who believe in doing things by the book. She hesitated. The question is, what are you going to do with this information? I carefully returned the papers to the folder. Nothing. Nothing? Michaels looked incredulous. Carter, this is proof of misconduct, of abuse of power. And if I bring these forward, I look like I'm going over my commanding officer's head because I'm unhappy with my living situation. I shook my head. The colonel would spin it as insubordination, as inability to adapt to changing circumstances. It would become my word against his, and he outranks me. So you're just going to let him get away with it? Let that entitled brat keep your quarters while you live in this... She gestured at Block D. This dump? I looked up at the stars appearing in the darkening sky. Remembering nights on deployment when those same stars had been my only comfort, my father's voice echoed in my memory. The truth doesn't need your help to exist, Emily. It just needs a chance to be seen. I'm going to trust the system, I said finally. The same system I've served and believed in. General Anderson is coming tomorrow. He'll inspect everything, including housing records. And if nothing comes of it, I ran my fingers over the soil in one of my potted plants, feeling its cool solidity. Then I'll know where I stand, and I'll make my decisions accordingly. Michaels looked like she wanted to say more, but instead she just nodded. Get some rest, Carter. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake thinking about my father, about the legacy of service he'd left me, about the principles he'd instilled in me from childhood: integrity, honor, patience, the belief that doing the right thing mattered, even when, especially when, it was difficult. I thought about Colonel Reynolds and his nephew, about systems that could be manipulated by those with power, about the fine line between respecting chain of command and enabling corruption. By dawn, I had reached a place of calm certainty. Whatever happened today would happen. I would face it with dignity, with the quiet strength that had carried me through battlefields and loss. I would not compromise who I was, not for comfort, not for convenience, not even for justice. I dressed with particular care that morning, ensuring every detail of my uniform was immaculate. As I pinned my father's service medal to my chest, the one personal touch regulations allowed, I made him a silent promise. I would make him proud, no matter the outcome. The base was buzzing with anticipation when I reported for duty. General Anderson's inspection was always a significant event, but this year the tension felt heightened, as if the very air was charged with expectation. Colonel Reynolds had assembled the officers in the main administration building, his uniform perfect, his expression severe. The general will arrive at 0900 hours, he announced. I expect nothing less than excellence from every department. Captain Carter, you will report to the supply warehouse. The general has specifically requested to inspect it first. Yes, sir, I replied, ignoring the small smile that played at the corners of his mouth. He clearly thought he was isolating me from the inspection. unaware that the warehouse was now the most organized facility on base, thanks to my all-night effort. At precisely 0900, General Robert Anderson's convoy rolled through the main gate of Fort Bragg. A tall, imposing figure with steel-gray hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His reputation preceded him, fair but exacting, a stickler for protocol who had risen through the ranks on merit alone. I stood at attention as he entered the warehouse, Colonel Reynolds at his side. "General Anderson, this is Captain Emily Carter." Colonel Reynolds introduced me with a formality that bordered on coldness. She's been overseeing the supply operations. The general's handshake was firm, his gaze assessing. "Captain, impressive organization you have here." "Thank you, sir. I understand you were recently reassigned to Block D housing," he said casually, though something in his tone suggested the question wasn't as innocuous as it appeared. Colonel Reynolds interjected smoothly. "A routine reassignment, sir. Part of our ongoing efficiency improvements." The general nodded, but his eyes never left my face. "And how are you finding your new quarters, Captain?" I hesitated for just a moment before answering truthfully. "They're functional, sir." A ghost of a smile touched the general's lips. "Functional. I see." He turned to Colonel Reynolds. "I'd like to see the housing records after we complete the warehouse inspection, Colonel. I'm interested in these efficiency improvements." "Of course, sir," Reynolds replied, a flicker of unease crossing his face so quickly I almost missed it. As they moved deeper into the warehouse, I caught the general glancing back at me, his expression unreadable. But for the first time in 2 weeks, I felt something close to hope. The warehouse inspection proceeded with meticulous thoroughness. General Anderson examined inventory, logs, equipment maintenance records, and supply chains with the precision of a surgeon. Colonel Reynolds hovered nearby, alternating between boasting about base improvements and subtly undermining my contributions. "Captain Carter has only recently taken over warehouse duties," he remarked at one point. "Most of the organizational systems were implemented under my guidance." I said nothing, knowing the pristine condition of the warehouse spoke for itself. The general merely nodded, making notes in a small black notebook he carried. When the inspection concluded, General Anderson closed his notebook with a decisive snap. "Excellent work, Captain Carter. One of the most efficient warehouse operations I've seen in my last dozen inspections." "Thank you, sir." "Now," he turned to Colonel A. Reynolds. "Those housing records, Colonel?" "Of course, sir. If you'll follow me to the administration building." As they departed, the colonel shot me a warning glance over his shoulder. "Stay away," his eyes said clearly. I had no intention of following them. This was the moment of truth, and it would unfold without my intervention. Instead, I continued my duties, though my mind was elsewhere. Staff Sergeant Michaels found me an hour later, practically vibrating with suppressed excitement. "It's happening," she whispered, pulling me into an empty office. "The general requested all housing records for the past year. When he saw yours, saw that there was no official reassignment, he started asking questions, pointed ones. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of questions? About procedure, about authorization, about why a captain with your service record was reassigned to Block D without documentation." Her eyes gleamed. "Reynolds is sweating bullets, trying to explain it away as a clerical oversight, but Anderson isn't buying it. Where are they now?" "The general ordered a full inspection of all officer housing, including your old quarters." Michaels couldn't suppress her grin. "They're on their way there now. Word is Private Reynolds and his friends didn't exactly keep the place inspection ready." I should have felt vindication, perhaps even satisfaction. Instead, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the truth was emerging. Sadness that it had come to this at all. "What will you do if they offer you your quarters back?" Michaels asked. "I don't know," I admitted. It was a question I'd avoided considering, afraid to hope for an outcome that seemed increasingly possible. "You should be there," she urged. "When it all comes to a head." I shook my head. "That would look like I orchestrated this." "You didn't orchestrate anything," Michaels countered. "The truth is doing all the heavy lifting." After a moment's hesitation, I nodded. "I'll finish up here, then make my way over." By the time I approached my former quarters, a small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance. The general's vehicle was parked outside, along with Colonel Reynolds's. The tension in the air was palpable. I stayed at the periphery, not wanting to draw attention. From snippets of conversation around me, I pieced together what had happened. General Anderson had found Private Reynolds and several friends inside, the quarters in complete disarray. with beer cans, food containers, and various contraband items in plain sight. The inspection had quickly transformed into something closer to an interrogation. Suddenly, the door burst open. Private Reynolds stumbled out, his face ashen, followed by Colonel Reynolds, whose customary confidence had evaporated. General Anderson emerged last, his expression thunderous. "Colonel Reynolds," his voice carried across the now silent gathering. "According to these records, Captain Emily Carter is the only legal resident of this property. Her name is the one on the lease, not yours, not your nephew's." The silence that followed was deafening. Soldiers froze. Private Reynolds's face went even paler, and for the first time in his career, Colonel Reynolds seemed to have no words. The general's gaze swept the crowd until it found me. "Captain Carter, step forward, please." Heart hammering, I moved through the parting crowd until I stood before him. "Sir, these are your assigned quarters." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. And you were ordered to vacate them." "Without proper documentation or procedure?" I hesitated, acutely aware of Colonel Reynolds's glare. "I was reassigned to Block D, sir." "That wasn't my question, Captain." The general's voice was stern but not unkind. "Were you ordered to vacate without proper procedure?" I straightened my shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "Yes, sir." General Anderson nodded, as if I'd confirmed something he already knew. Colonel Reynolds claimed this was a clerical oversight, that the paperwork exists but was misfiled. He paused. "Did you ever see or sign any reassignment documents, Captain?" "No, sir." The colonel's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "General, with all due respect, I'm not addressing you at the moment, Colonel." Anderson cut him off without taking his eyes off me. "Captain Carter, did you report this breach of protocol?" "No, sir." "May I ask why not?" I chose my words carefully, aware that my answer might well determine the course of not just this situation, but my career. "I believed in following the chain of command, sir, and I trusted that the system would correct itself in time." Something like approval flashed in the general's eyes. "A commendable approach, Captain, though perhaps overly optimistic." He turned to Colonel Reynolds. "Colonel, you and I have much to discuss. In the meantime, Captain Carter will resume occupancy of her assigned quarters immediately. Private Reynolds will report to standard barracks housing by 1800 hours today." Colonel Reynolds stiffened. "General, I must protest." "Your protest is noted, Colonel, and will be addressed in our discussion, along with several other matters that have come to my attention." The general's tone made it clear the conversation was over. As he walked away, he paused beside me. "Captain Carter?" "Sir?" "Your father was Sergeant First Class William Carter, wasn't he?" Surprised, I nodded. "Yes, sir. I served with him in Desert Storm. He was a man of uncommon integrity." The general's voice softened slightly. "He would be proud of how you've conducted yourself." With that, he continued toward his vehicle, leaving me standing there, emotion threatening to overwhelm my carefully maintained composure. The crowd began to disperse, whispers spreading like wildfire. Private Reynolds slunk away, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Colonel Reynolds followed the general, his posture rigid with suppressed fury. Staff Sergeant Michaels approached, keys in hand. "Found these in the housing office," she said, pressing them into my palm. "Welcome home, Captain." I closed my fingers around the cool metal, the reality of what had just happened finally sinking in. Justice, arriving not through my own actions, but through the simple power of truth coming to light. Later that evening, after Private Reynolds and his friends had cleared out, I stood in the center of my reclaimed quarters. The place was a mess. It would take days to clean properly, but it was mine again. Not just the physical space, but the dignity it represented, the acknowledgement of my place in the order of things. As I hung my father's photograph back on the wall, I thought about all that had transpired. The humiliation, the silent endurance, the unexpected vindication. I had lost something in these past weeks, perhaps some naivete about how the world worked, but I had gained something too. A deeper understanding of my own resilience, of the kind of officer and person I wanted to be. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Lieutenant Rivera and several other officers holding cleaning supplies and takeout food. "Thought you might want some help getting this place back in order," Rivera said with a smile. "And some company." I stepped aside to let them in, gratitude warming my chest. I'd like that very much. The aftermath of General Anderson's inspection rippled through Fort Bragg like shockwaves. By morning, everyone had heard some version of what happened. How Colonel Reynolds had been caught abusing his authority. How Private Jason Reynolds had been evicted from quarters he had no right to occupy. How Captain Emily Carter had been vindicated without ever filing a complaint. I awoke in my own bed for the first time in weeks, sunlight streaming through windows that now bore fresh curtains, thanks to the cleaning party that had extended well into the night. Rivera and the others had helped transform the chaos left behind by Private Reynolds back into something resembling my home, working with a determined energy that spoke volumes about where their loyalties lay. When I reported for duty that morning, the atmosphere had shifted subtly. Salutes seemed crisper, greetings more respectful. Even soldiers who had previously avoided eye contact now met my gaze directly, some with small nods of acknowledgement. Captain Carter, Major Harrison, the base executive officer, intercepted me outside headquarters. "A word, please." He led me to a small conference room, closing the door behind us. "I wanted to inform you personally that Colonel Reynolds has been temporarily relieved of command, pending an investigation into several administrative irregularities." I kept my expression neutral, though my pulse quickened. "I see, sir. General Anderson has appointed me acting commander until the investigation concludes." He hesitated. "The general also specifically requested that you be assigned as liaison to the investigative team." This was unexpected. "Sir, he believes your first-hand experience with the colonel's management style will be valuable to the investigation." Major Harrison's careful phrasing suggested he knew more than he was saying. "You'll be temporarily relieved of your regular duties to focus on this assignment. Report to Conference Room C at 0900 hours tomorrow. The investigative team from Division will brief you then." "Yes, sir." I hesitated. "May I ask about Private Reynolds' status?" A flicker of something, disgust perhaps, crossed the Major's face. "Private Reynolds has been reassigned to field training exercise support for the next month. I believe he's currently helping to dig latrines for the incoming battalion." I suppressed the small surge of satisfaction at this news. "Thank you for the information, sir." As I turned to leave, Harrison added, "For what it's worth, Carter, most of the officers on this base have tremendous respect for how you handled the situation. It took considerable restraint." His words stayed with me as I walked across the base, acknowledging salutes and greetings with a new awareness of my position. The housing incident had transformed me in the eyes of my fellow soldiers. No longer just Captain Carter, but a symbol of something. Of, resilience, perhaps. Of justice. The thought was uncomfortable. I hadn't sought this role. Had actively avoided the spotlight by choosing not to file complaints or make accusations. Yet here I was anyway, thrust into the center of what was rapidly becoming a significant disciplinary matter. My phone buzzed with a text message from Staff Sergeant Michaels. "Colonel's office being packed up. Rumor. Mill in overdrive. Meet for coffee?" We convened at the base cafe 20 minutes later, Michaels practically vibrating with suppressed excitement. "You would not believe the stories coming out now that Reynolds is off base," she said as soon as I sat down. "People are finally talking about all the times he bent or broke regulations to favor his nephew or punish officers he didn't like. Like reassigning their quarters without paperwork," I suggested dryly. "That's just the tip of the iceberg. There's talk about misappropriated training funds, falsified evaluation reports, even altered promotion recommendations." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Some of the senior NCOs are saying this has been going on for years, but nobody dared speak up because Reynolds has too many connections at Division." I frowned. If that's true, why would General Anderson take action now? Surely he must have suspected something before. Word is, he's been building a case slowly, gathering evidence, waiting for Reynolds to make a mistake big enough to justify a full investigation. Michaels smiled. "Your housing situation might have been the final straw. I'm not sure how I feel about that." I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, absorbing its warmth. I never wanted to be the catalyst for someone's downfall. "You weren't the catalyst. Reynolds was his own catalyst. You were just—" She searched for the right word, the mirror that reflected his true character back at him. Before I could respond, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number with a Pentagon area code. "Captain Carter," I answered, moving away from the table for privacy. "Captain, this is Lieutenant Colonel Wilson from the Inspector General's office." The voice was crisp, professional. "I'm calling regarding the ongoing investigation at Fort Bragg. I understand you'll be serving as liaison to our investigative team." "Yes, sir. I was just informed this morning." "Good. I wanted to touch base before we arrive tomorrow. This investigation may expand beyond Colonel Reynolds' actions regarding housing assignments. We have reason to believe there may be a pattern of misconduct affecting multiple areas of base operations. My conversation with Michael suddenly seemed prophetic. I understand, sir. I should warn you, Captain. Your involvement puts you in a delicate position. There are those who will see you as a whistleblower, even though you never filed a formal complaint. I'm prepared for that, sir. Are you? His tone suggested skepticism. Reynolds has friends in high places. This could impact your career trajectory. The implication was clear. I might have won this battle, but the war for my military future was just beginning. With respect, sir, I believe in doing what's right, regardless of personal consequences. My father's words, coming out of my mouth. That's commendable, Captain. I look forward to working with you. He paused. One more thing. I'd advise discretion regarding any aspects of the investigation. As of this moment, you're part of an official inquiry. Understood, sir. When I returned to the table, Michaels raised an eyebrow. Important call? Just some follow-up about my housing situation, I lied, the words tasting bitter. I didn't like deceiving a friend, but Lieutenant Colonel Wilson's warning about discretion was still ringing in my ears. The next morning, I reported to Conference Room C precisely at 0900 hours. The investigative team consisted of Lieutenant Colonel Wilson, a sharp-eyed man with salt and pepper hair and the focused intensity of a career investigator, along with 2 captains and a warrant officer, all from division headquarters. Captain Carter, Wilson greeted me with a firm handshake. Thank you for your punctuality. Please, have a seat. For the next 3 hours, they questioned me about every interaction I'd had with Colonel Reynolds, particularly regarding the housing reassignment. I answered truthfully, neither embellishing nor downplaying the events. When they asked why I hadn't reported the incident, I explained my reasoning as simply as I could. I believed in the system, I said. That proper procedure would eventually correct the situation. Wilson exchanged glances with the others. That's an unusually optimistic view, Captain. Most officers in your position would have filed a complaint. Immediately. My father taught me that sometimes patience is more powerful than confrontation, I replied. That truth doesn't need your help to exist. It just needs a chance to be seen. Your father was Sergeant First Class William Carter, correct? Wilson made a note in his file. Yes, sir. General Anderson mentioned him. Said he was a man of exceptional character. Wilson studied me for a moment. It seems the apple didn't fall far from the tree. The compliment caught me off guard. Thank you, sir. As the session concluded, Wilson assigned me my first task as liaison, gathering housing records for all officer quarters reassignments over the past 3 years. We're looking for patterns, he explained. If he did this to you, chances are you weren't the first. Over the next week, I divided my time between my regular duties and supporting the investigation. The findings were troubling. Colonel Reynolds had systematically manipulated housing assignments to benefit friends and family members, often at the expense of officers who had either questioned his methods or simply failed to earn his favor. My case wasn't unique, just the most recent and blatant example of a pattern that stretched back to his earliest days commanding the base. As the evidence mounted, so did the tension at Fort Bragg. Clear lines were being drawn between those who supported the investigation and those who remained loyal to Colonel Reynolds. The latter group was smaller, but included several influential officers who made their displeasure known through subtle acts of obstruction and not-so-subtle comments. Here comes the Colonel's assassin, I overheard Major Simmons mutter to another officer as I passed them in the hallway. I pretended not to hear, but the words stung. I hadn't sought this role, hadn't wanted to be the face of Reynolds' downfall. Yet increasingly, that was how I was being perceived, either as a hero who had exposed corruption or as a traitor who had betrayed the chain of command, depending on who was doing the perceiving. The pressure intensified when Private Jason Reynolds was called to testify before the investigative team. He emerged from the interview room red-faced and visibly shaken, stalking past me without acknowledgement. Hours later, I received an anonymous email. Hope you're happy with yourself. You've destroyed good careers. Because you couldn't handle a little housing reassignment. I forwarded the email to Lieutenant Colonel Wilson without comment. His response was immediate. Expected pushback. Continue as assigned. Security measures being implemented. That evening, I returned to my quarters to find the door ajar, lights on inside, though I'd turned them off when I left that morning. Heart pounding, I approached. Cautiously, one hand reaching for my phone to call security. Before I could dial, Staff Sergeant Michaels stepped out, hands raised. It's just me, Carter. Don't shoot. What are you doing in my quarters? I demanded, adrenaline still coursing through my system. Installing these. She pointed to small devices mounted near the windows and door. Security cameras. Wilson ordered them for all key personnel involved in the investigation. Apparently, there have been threats. The anonymous email suddenly took on a more sinister dimension. Threats? Nothing specific yet. But you know how these things go. People get desperate when they're cornered. She finished adjusting the final camera. These feed directly to base security. Anyone tries anything stupid, response time will be under 3 minutes. I sank into my armchair, the weight of the situation finally hitting me full force. This has gone so far beyond what I expected. Michael sat across from me, her expression serious. Did you really think exposing years of corruption would be simple or clean? Reynolds built himself a little empire here. Empires don't fall quietly. I didn't expose anything, I protested. General. Anderson discovered the discrepancy in the housing records. After you refused to lie about it, Michaels pointed out. After you stood your ground without compromising your integrity. Don't minimize what you did, Carter. It mattered. As she left, I wondered if she was right. Had my quiet resistance actually been a form of courage? Or had I simply been in the right place at the right time when justice finally caught up with Colonel Reynolds? Either way, I was now irrevocably part of something larger than myself, a reckoning that would reshape Fort Bragg, for better or worse. The investigation expanded with alarming speed. What had begun as an inquiry into housing irregularities soon encompassed training fund allocation, promotion recommendations, disciplinary actions, and even contract awards for base services. Lieutenant Colonel Wilson and his team worked methodically, interviewing dozens of personnel, reviewing thousands of documents, and building what appeared to be an airtight case against not just Colonel Reynolds, but several officers within his inner circle. Through it all, I continued my dual role as both an officer performing regular duties and a liaison to the investigation. The strain was considerable. Some days I felt like I was walking a tightrope between maintaining professional relationships with my colleagues and supporting an investigation that might implicate some of them. You look exhausted, Lieutenant Rivera commented one morning as we prepared for daily briefing. This investigation is taking a toll on you. I couldn't deny it. Sleep had become elusive, my appetite diminished. I'm fine, I insisted, just adjusting to the additional responsibilities. She looked skeptical but didn't press the issue. Well, for what it's worth, most of us think you're handling an impossible situation with remarkable grace. Most of us? Rivera hesitated. There are still some holdouts. Officers who benefited from Reynolds's flexible approach to regulations. They're not happy about having their privileges scrutinized. I've noticed, I said dryly, thinking of the increasingly cold reception I received from certain quarters. Just watch your back, she advised. People with something to hide can be unpredictable. Her warning proved prescient later that day when Major Simmons cornered me in an empty corridor. Carter, he began without preamble. This witch hunt needs to stop. I maintained my professional composure. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Major. Don't play dumb. You know exactly what I'm talking about. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Reynolds made one mistake with your housing situation, and now you're helping the IG tear apart years of effective leadership. The investigation is following standard protocol, I replied evenly. If there's nothing to find, then there's nothing to worry about. His laugh was harsh. We both know that's not how these things work. Once the IG starts digging, they don't stop until they find something, anything, to justify their existence. He jabbed a finger toward me. You could put in a word. Tell them Reynolds made a single error in judgment. This whole thing could go away. I stepped back, creating distance between us. That would be inappropriate interference with an official investigation, Major. So that's how it's going to be. His expression hardened. You should think carefully about your future in this man's army, Carter. Today you're the IG's golden girl, but tomorrow, when this is over, you'll be remembered as the officer who couldn't handle a housing reassignment and brought down good soldiers as a result. Is that a threat, sir? My voice remained steady despite the anger building inside me. Just a reality check. He walked away, calling over his shoulder. Choose your side carefully. I reported the encounter to Lieutenant Colonel Wilson immediately. He listened without interruption, making notes. Major Simmons is on our radar, he said when I finished. This conversation confirms our suspicions about his involvement in some of the contract irregularities we've uncovered. He seemed desperate, I observed. They're all getting desperate. Wilson closed his notebook, which means we need to accelerate our timeline. The preliminary report goes to General Anderson tomorrow. By this time next week, formal charges will likely be filed. The significance of his words hit me. This is really happening, isn't it? Criminal charges? Multiple counts of misappropriation of government funds, abuse of authority, conspiracy, possibly even fraud. Wilson's expression was grave. This goes well beyond a simple housing violation, Captain. Reynolds and his inner circle have been operating what amounts to a corruption ring for years. That evening, I sat on my small porch, watching the sunset and trying to process everything that had happened. What had begun as a personal humiliation had snowballed into something that would likely end multiple careers, possibly even result in prison time for some. The weight of that reality settled heavily on my shoulders. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Parking lot. See, 15 minutes. Come alone if you want to hear Reynolds' side. Every instinct told me to ignore the message, to forward it to Wilson, to follow protocol. But something, curiosity perhaps, or a desire for closure, made me hesitate. After a moment's deliberation, I texted Michaels. Received suspicious message requesting meeting. Parking lot C, 15 minutes. Monitoring situation but notifying you as I. Precaution. I included a screenshot of the original text. Her response was immediate. Do not go alone. Wait for backup. But I was already walking toward parking lot C, a seldom used area behind the motor pool. I wasn't being reckless. I had no intention of going into the shadows or anywhere isolated. I would stay in the open, within sight of the security cameras I knew were mounted on the nearby buildings. And I would leave at the first sign of trouble. The lot was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few service vehicles parked along the perimeter. I positioned myself under a light post, one hand on my phone, ready to call for help if necessary. Captain Carter. The voice came from behind me. I turned to find Private Jason Reynolds standing there, alone, his usual cockiness replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. Private Reynolds. I kept my tone neutral. You sent the text? He nodded, glancing nervously around the lot. I needed to talk to you, away from the investigation team. Whatever you have to say should be said officially through proper channels, like my uncle did with your housing assignment. His attempt at sarcasm fell flat, his voice cracking slightly. Look, I know you have no reason to listen to me. I was a jerk to you. I took advantage of my uncle's position. I disrespected your rank and your quarters. This was not what I had expected. Why are you telling me this now? He ran a hand through his hair, agitation evident in every movement. Because they're making my uncle out to be some kind of criminal mastermind, like he was running a corruption ring or something. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I kept my distance, still wary of his intentions. He just wanted to help people he cared about. Me, some of his friends from West Point, their kids. Jason's voice dropped. It got out of hand, I guess. But he's not a bad person. He doesn't deserve what's happening to him. I studied him for a moment, trying to reconcile this version of Jason Reynolds, vulnerable, defensive of his uncle, with the arrogant young man who had smirked as he took my keys. The investigation isn't about my housing assignment anymore, I said finally. It's about a pattern of behavior that undermined the integrity of this base's operations. So you won't help him. It wasn't a question. It's not about helping or hurting anyone. It's about the truth. Jason laughed bitterly. The truth. Right. Like it's that simple. He turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth, I am sorry about your quarters. I knew it wasn't right, but I went along with it anyway. That's on me. As he walked away, I felt a complicated mixture of emotions. Sympathy, yes, but also a reinforcement of my conviction that what was happening was necessary. Colonel Reynolds might have believed he was simply helping people he cared about, but in doing so, he had corrupted the system he was sworn to uphold. I was about to leave when 3 security vehicles screeched into the lot, lights flashing. Staff Sergeant Michaels jumped out of the lead vehicle, followed by 2 MPs. Carter! She ran toward me. Are you all right? We tracked your phone. Location and... I'm fine, I assured her, watching as the MPs intercepted Jason Reynolds at the edge of the lot. It was just Private Reynolds. He wanted to talk about his uncle. Michaels looked skeptical. And you thought meeting him alone was a good idea? I stayed in plain sight, under the cameras. I nodded toward the security devices mounted on the nearby building. And I texted you first. After you'd already decided to come, she pointed out. That's not following protocol, Carter. That's covering your bases while doing something stupid. She was right, and I knew it. It won't happen again. Damn right it won't. Wilson would have my head if anything happened to his star witness. She sighed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. What did Reynolds want anyway? To defend. His uncle. To tell me it wasn't as bad as the investigation is making it out to be. And you believe that? I thought about Jason's words, about the desperation in his voice, about the complex interplay of family loyalty and personal ambition that had driven both Reynolds men. I believe he believes it, I said finally. But that doesn't make it true. The formal charges came down 3 days. Later, Colonel Reynolds and 2 other officers were charged with multiple violations of military law, including conduct unbecoming an officer, misappropriation of government resources, and abuse of authority. 4 other personnel, including Major Simmons, received administrative punishment for lesser violations. The base buzzed with the news, a mixture of shock, vindication, and uncertainty about what would come next. For me, there was a strange sense of anticlimactic relief. The investigation was largely complete, my role as liaison winding down. Soon I would return to my regular duties, to the normal rhythm of military life, or so I thought. General Anderson requested my presence at his temporary office on base the following morning. I arrived precisely on time, uniform perfect, mind racing with possibilities about why he wanted to see me. Captain Carter, he greeted me warmly, rising from behind his desk. Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. Thank you, sir. I sat at attention, spine straight, hands resting on my knees. I've been reviewing the full investigative report, he began, tapping a thick folder on his desk. Your assistance was invaluable to Lieutenant Colonel Wilson's team. I was simply doing my duty, sir. The general smiled slightly. Your modesty is commendable, but let's not minimize what happened here. Your integrity in the face of unfair treatment created the opportunity for a much larger truth to emerge. He leaned forward. That kind of moral courage is rarer than you might think, Captain. Thank you, sir. Which brings me to the reason I asked you here today. He opened a different folder. I'm implementing several changes at Fort Bragg in the wake of this investigation. New leadership, new protocols, new oversight mechanisms. He looked up at me. And I need officers with demonstrated integrity to help implement these changes. My pulse quickened. Sir, I'm offering you a promotion, Captain Carter, to major with a position on the base command staff. You would report directly to the new base commander, helping to ensure that the reforms we're putting in place take root. The offer was unexpected, momentarily leaving me speechless. A promotion to major typically took years longer than my current time in service, and a position on command staff would be a significant career advancement. I don't know what to say, sir. You might consider saying yes, General Anderson suggested with a hint of amusement, unless you have reservations. Did I? The promotion would be seen by some as a reward for my role in the investigation. There would be whispers, resentment from certain quarters. The path forward wouldn't be easy. But then, the right path rarely was. I accept, sir, I said, the words feeling momentous as they left my lips. I'm honored by your confidence in me. General Anderson nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Excellent. The promotion ceremony will be held next Friday. I'll preside over it myself before I return to division headquarters. As I left his office, the full weight of what had just happened settled over me. In the span of a month, I'd gone from being humiliated in front of my peers to receiving a field-grade promotion that typically required years more service. The trajectory was dizzying. News of my promotion spread through Fort Bragg with predictable swiftness. The reactions were equally predictable. Genuine congratulations from many, thinly veiled resentment from others, and outright hostility from those who had been closest to Colonel Reynolds. Major Carter, Lieutenant Rivera tested the title when she caught up with me outside the officers' mess that afternoon. It has a nice ring to it. It still doesn't feel real, I admitted. Well, it's certainly earned. She fell into step beside me. Word is you'll be working directly with Colonel Westfield when he arrives next week to take command. Colonel James Westfield, I'd heard the name but never met the man. That's my understanding. Do you know anything about him? Only his reputation. West Point graduate, 2 silver stars from Afghanistan, known for running a tight but fair ship. She glanced at me. And apparently, he specifically requested you for his command team when General Anderson offered him the position. This was news to me. Why would he request someone so he's never met? Maybe your reputation precedes you too. Rivera smiled. The officer who stood her ground with quiet dignity and helped expose years of corruption? That's the kind of person you want beside you when rebuilding trust in a command structure. I wasn't entirely comfortable with this characterization. It felt too heroic, too simplified compared to the complex reality I'd lived through. but I couldn't deny the core truth of it. My actions, or perhaps more accurately, my reactions, had played a role in bringing necessary change to Fort Bragg. The week leading up to my promotion ceremony passed in a blur of preparations and transitions. I handed off my current responsibilities, attended briefings about my new role, and tried to adjust mentally to the idea of being Major Carter instead of Captain Carter. Throughout it all, I found myself thinking often of my father. What would he have made of all this? Would he have been proud of how I'd handled the situation with Colonel Reynolds? Would he have approved of my accepting a promotion that some might view as opportunistic? The night before the ceremony, I sat alone in my quarters, holding his photograph and speaking to him as if he were there. "I didn't ask for any of this, Dad," I said softly. "The housing reassignment, the investigation, the promotion, none of it. I just tried to do what you always taught me. Stand tall when things aren't fair. Trust in the system. Believe that truth would prevail." I traced his face through the glass. I hope that was enough. I hope I made the right choices. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt full of his presence, of the values he'd instilled in me, of the quiet strength he'd modeled throughout his military career. "I miss you," I whispered, "especially today." The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for an outdoor ceremony. The parade ground had been prepared with a small stage, rows of chairs, and the stars and stripes fluttering proudly overhead. As I approached in my dress uniform, I was surprised by the number of people gathering. Not just the obligatory attendance of on-duty personnel, but many off-duty soldiers as well, coming voluntarily to witness the occasion. Staff Sergeant Michaels intercepted me before I reached the stage area. "Nervous?" she asked, straightening my already perfect collar. "A little," I admitted. "It feels like a lot of attention for something that happens every day in the Army." "Not like this, it doesn't." She stepped back, examining me critically. "Most promotions don't come with the backstory yours has. Most don't represent what yours represents." "And what's that?" "Hope," she said simply. "Hope that the system can correct itself. That integrity still matters. That standing, quietly for what's right, can be as powerful as raising hell." Before I could respond, an aide approached to escort me to my position. The ceremony itself was standard military protocol: the reading of the promotion orders, the pinning of my new rank, the oath administered by General Anderson himself. But there was an undeniable energy in the air, a sense that this was more than a routine promotion. When General Anderson invited me to say a few words, I stepped to the microphone with a mixture of pride and humility. "Thank you, General Anderson, for this honor and opportunity," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "Throughout my military career, I've been guided by principles my father instilled in me: integrity, perseverance, and faith in the system we serve." I paused, scanning the faces before me. Supportive, expectant, some still skeptical. Recent events at Fort Bragg have tested those principles. They've tested all of us in different ways. But what I've seen emerge from that test is reassuring: a commitment to accountability, to transparency, to doing things the right way even when the easier path is available. I thought of Colonel Reynolds, of his nephew Jason, of the complex interplay of power and privilege that had led to their downfall. As I accept this promotion and new responsibilities, I do so with full awareness of the trust being placed in me. Trust that I will uphold the highest standards of military conduct. Trust that I will remember that rank is not a privilege but a responsibility. To those we lead, to those we serve alongside, and to the principles that make our military strong. I took a deep breath. I stand before you not as someone who sought to expose wrongdoing, but as someone who simply refused to pretend that wrong was right. That's not heroism. It's the basic duty of every soldier, regardless of rank. As I stepped back from the microphone, the applause that followed felt like more than mere courtesy. It felt like acknowledgement, like a collective exhalation after weeks of tension. General Anderson shook my hand firmly. "Well said, Major Carter. Simple, direct, and right to the heart of the matter." He lowered his voice so only I could hear. "Your father would be proud." The receiving line after the ceremony was longer than I expected. Fellow officers, enlisted personnel, even some civilian staff came to offer congratulations. Most exchanges were brief and formal, but a few stood out. Lieutenant Rivera clasped my hand firmly. "Save me a spot on your staff when I make captain," she said with a grin. Staff Sergeant Michaels opted for a sharp salute instead of a handshake. "Congratulations, ma'am. Well deserved." And then, unexpectedly, Private Jason Reynolds appeared at the end of the line. He stood, awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable in the dress uniform he rarely wore properly. Private Reynolds, I greeted him neutrally. Major Carter. He struggled to meet my eyes. I just wanted to say congratulations. And I'm sorry for everything. The simple sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. Thank you, Private. That means a lot. My uncle, he began, then faltered. He made his choices. I made mine. I have to live with that now. What will you do? I asked, genuinely curious about his path forward. I'm being transferred to Fort Hood next month. Fresh start. Away from... He gestured vaguely. All this. Trying to earn my rank the right way this time. That's commendable. He nodded awkwardly. Well, anyway. Congratulations again, Major. As he walked away, I felt a curious sense of closure. Jason Reynolds had been the immediate face of my humiliation, the smirking beneficiary of his uncle's corruption. Yet here he was, humbled, apologetic, attempting to chart a better course. It was, in its way, a microcosm of what Fort Bragg itself was trying to do: acknowledge past wrongs and move towards something better. The following Monday, I reported for my first day as part of the base command staff. Colonel James Westfield had arrived over the weekend, a tall, imposing figure with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. Major Carter. He rose from behind his desk as I entered his office. Thank you for being punctual. Please have a seat. I sat at attention, still adjusting to the weight of the oak leaves on my shoulders. I've read the complete file on the Reynolds investigation, he began without preamble, and I've spoken at length with General Anderson about the situation here at Fort Bragg. Yes, sir. Let me be direct, Major. This base has suffered a significant breach of trust. The soldiers here have witnessed their commanding officer abuse his authority for personal gain. They've seen favoritism override merit. They've watched as the system they're sworn to uphold was manipulated by those at the top. He leaned forward. That damage doesn't disappear with new leadership or a few promotions. I understand, sir. Good. Because rebuilding that trust, restoring faith in the chain of command, is going to be our primary mission in the coming months. He pushed a folder across the desk. I've outlined my initial reform plan. I want your input by 0900 tomorrow. Be brutally honest. If you see flaws, point them out. If you have better ideas, share them. I accepted the folder. Yes, sir. One more thing, Major. His expression softened slightly. Your handling of the Reynolds situation has earned you considerable respect among the enlisted ranks. That's a valuable asset as we move forward. But it also puts a target on your back. There are still those who view you as responsible for bringing down a commanding officer they admired. I'm aware of the sentiment, sir. Are you prepared to deal with it? The whispers, the potential insubordination, the subtle attempts to undermine your authority? I thought of the past month, the humiliation of being forced from my quarters, the quiet dignity I'd maintained throughout, the vindication when truth finally emerged. With respect, sir, I believe I've already demonstrated that I can handle difficult situations with professionalism and restraint. A smile flickered briefly across his face. Indeed you have, Major. Indeed you have. He stood, signaling the end of our meeting. I look forward to your input on the reform plan. Dismissed. As I left his office, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was clear. Fort Bragg needed healing, needed to rebuild the trust that had been broken by years of corruption and favoritism. And somehow, through circumstances I never could have predicted, I had become an integral part of that healing process. That evening, I walked across the parade, ground where my promotion ceremony had been held just days earlier. The chairs were gone, the stage dismantled, but the memory remained vivid. I paused, looking up at the stars emerging in the twilight sky. The same stars I'd gazed at during deployments, during moments of doubt and determination. My phone buzzed with a text from Staff Sergeant Michaels. Word is Colonel Westfield's already making changes. Housing assignments getting complete overhaul. Your influence? I smiled, typing back. Just doing my job, Sergeant. Just like you. Her response came quickly. You're going to be good at this, Major. Real good. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, continuing my walk across the darkening parade ground. The future stretched before me, full of challenges and opportunities I hadn't imagined when I'd stood at attention outside my quarters that fateful day, watching Colonel Reynolds approach with his nephew in tow. Sometimes the path to your purpose reveals itself in the strangest ways, through hardship, through injustice, through moments that test your character and resolve. My father had understood that. Now, I understood it too. 6 months passed with the relentless forward motion that defines military life. Under Colonel Westfield's leadership, Fort Bragg transformed. New protocols were implemented for housing assignments, training fund allocation, and promotion recommendations, all with transparent oversight and accountability measures. The culture shifted gradually but perceptibly, moving away from the favoritism and corner-cutting that had characterized the Reynolds era toward something more closely aligned with the Army's core values. My role in this transformation was both visible and demanding. As a member of Colonel Westfield's command staff, I helped design and implement many of the reforms, facing resistance at every turn from those who preferred the old ways. There were late nights, difficult conversations, and moments when success seemed impossibly distant. But there were victories too, small at first, then increasingly significant. The first time a junior officer thanked me for a housing assignment process that was actually fair. The day Staff Sergeant Michaels reported that enlisted personnel were noting improved transparency in duty assignments. The morning Colonel Westfield showed me the results of our first base-wide survey, which indicated growing trust in leadership. "We're making progress, Major," he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Slower than I'd like, but undeniable progress nonetheless." "Thank you, sir." I studied the survey results, noting areas where skepticism still ran high. We still have work to do with the senior NCOs. They're the most resistant to the new evaluation systems. Not surprising. They thrived under the old regime. Change threatens their established positions. He closed the file. "Schedule a meeting with the top sergeants. Let's address their concerns directly." "Yes, sir." As I turned to leave, he added, "By the way, Major, General Anderson will be visiting next week. He's specifically requested an update on our reforms from you personally." "Me, sir? You've become something of a symbol, Carter." The officer whose stand against corruption sparked meaningful change. A rare smile crossed his face. The general has a flair for the symbolic. I wasn't entirely comfortable with this characterization, but I'd learned to accept that my personal experience had taken on broader significance in the narrative of Fort Bragg's transformation. My story, from humiliation to vindication to leadership, had become intertwined with the base's journey toward redemption. The day before General Anderson's visit, I received an unexpected phone call from the hospital in my hometown of Asheville. "Is this Major Emily Carter?" a gentle voice asked. "Yes, this is Major Carter." "Major, I'm calling about Sergeant William Carter. He's asked to speak with you." My heart stuttered. There must be some mistake. My father passed away 3 years ago. "I'm sorry," the nurse clarified quickly. "I'm calling about Sergeant James Carter. Your uncle? He's been admitted to our palliative care unit, and he's asking for you." Uncle James, my father's older brother. We'd never been close. After my father's funeral, he'd disappeared back into whatever solitary life he'd built for himself. I hadn't heard from him since. "How did he know to ask for me as Major?" I asked, confused. "We haven't spoken in years." "He has newspaper clippings about you," the nurse explained. "Articles about some investigation at Fort Bragg. He seems very proud." The knowledge that my uncle had been following my career from afar was unexpectedly moving. "Please tell him I'll be there as soon as possible." Colonel Westfield granted my emergency leave request without hesitation. "Family comes first, Major. The General's visit can proceed without you." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate your understanding." The drive to Asheville took just over 3 hours, giving me plenty of time to wonder why Uncle James had suddenly reached out after years of silence. We'd never been close, even when my father was alive. He'd been the silent presence at family gatherings, the shadow at the edge of photographs, the brother who had chosen a different path from my father's military career. The hospital was quiet when I arrived, visiting hours nearly over. I found my way to the palliative care unit, where a nurse directed me to room 307. "He's been waiting for you," she said softly. "Refused his pain medication until you arrived." I hesitated outside the door, steeling myself. My last memory of Uncle James was at my father's funeral, a gaunt, weathered man standing apart from the other mourners, declining to speak at the service. When I entered, I almost didn't recognize him. The man in the bed seemed impossibly frail, his skin nearly translucent, his breathing labored, but his eyes, the same blue as my father's, as mine, brightened with recognition. "Emily," he whispered, "you came." "Of course I came, Uncle James." I moved to his bedside, taking his bony hand in mine. "What's happening? Are you ill?" "Dying," he replied matter-of-factly. "Cancer, Terminal. Few days left, maybe less. The bluntness was jarring, but somehow appropriate. Uncle James had never been one for sentimentality. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it despite our distant relationship. Is there anything I can do? Already doing it, by being here. His eyes traveled to my uniform, to the Major's oak leaves on my shoulders. Saw the articles about what happened at Fort Bragg. Proud of you. Thank you. I was surprised by how much his approval meant to me. Reminded me of your father. William always stood his ground. Quiet-like. Never made a show of it. He coughed. A painful sound that seemed to rattle his entire frame. Got something for you. In that drawer. I opened the bedside drawer and found a worn envelope. Inside was a faded photograph of two young men in army uniforms standing side by side, my father and Uncle James, decades ago. Korea, he explained. Both sergeants then, before the fight. What fight? He seemed surprised I didn't know. The reason we barely spoke for 30 years. His breathing grew more labored. Commanding officer was stealing supplies, selling them. I looked the other way. Your father reported it. I stared at him. Pieces of family history I'd never known suddenly falling into place. CO was court-martialed. Uncle James continued. I was reprimanded for not reporting what I knew. Blamed your father for years. Stupid pride. His hand tightened weakly around mine. When I saw those articles about you, standing up to that colonel, it was like seeing William again. I didn't know, I said softly. Dad never told me about any of this. Wouldn't. Not his way. Uncle James's eyes drifted to the window, to the mountain view beyond. Wanted to tell you, before I go, proud of you. Proud you're like him, not like me. I sat with him through the night, listening as he shared fragments of stories about my father I'd never heard. Tales from their childhood, from their early army days, from the years before their falling out. In those hours, I gained a fuller picture of my father than I'd ever had, seeing him not just as the parent I'd known, but as the brother, the soldier, the man of principle that Uncle James had both resented and admired. Near dawn, Uncle James's breathing changed, becoming shallower, more irregular. The nurse who checked on us warned me that the end was near. Is there anything else I can do for you? I asked, still holding his hand. His eyes, clouded now with approaching death, found mine with surprising clarity. Already did it. Stood your ground. Like William. Family legacy. Those were his last coherent words. He slipped away as the sun rose, his hand growing cold in mine, his face relaxing into an expression of peace I'd never seen him wear in life. I drove back to Fort Bragg the next day, arriving just as General Anderson's visit was concluding. I reported directly to Colonel Westfield's office, apologizing for my absence. No apologies necessary, Major, he assured me. How is your uncle? He passed away, sir, but I'm grateful I had the chance to be with him at the end. I'm sorry for your loss. The colonel studied my face. You seem changed by the experience. I learned something important, sir, about my father, about family history. I hesitated, then decided to share the story. It seems standing up for what's right runs in my blood. My father reported a commanding officer for corruption decades ago. It cost him his relationship with his brother for 30 years. Colonel Westfield nodded thoughtfully. The price of integrity can be steep. Was it worth it, do you think? For your father? I considered the question, remembering Uncle James's final words. I believe he thought so, sir, and in the end, even the brother who resented him for it came to recognize he'd done the right thing. There's a lesson in that, Major. Sometimes vindication takes longer than we'd like. Yes, sir. I straightened my shoulders. If you'll excuse me, I should catch up on what I missed during the General's visit. Of course. As I turned to leave, he added, Oh, and Major, General Anderson? Left something for you. Said it was long overdue. He handed me an official envelope. Inside was a formal commendation for exceptional integrity and moral courage in the face of corruption, signed by General Anderson himself. Attached was a handwritten note. Your father's legacy lives on. Well done. The following week brought another unexpected development. The base newspaper ran a feature, story about the reforms at Fort Bragg, highlighting my role as both catalyst and implementer of change. The article was straightforward, factual, but undeniably positive, portraying the Reynolds investigation not as a scandal, but as a necessary correction, a return to the Army's core values. Staff Sergeant Michaels dropped a copy on my desk with a grin. You're famous now, Major. I skimmed the article, uncomfortable with the attention but acknowledging the importance of the narrative it presented. It's not about me. It's about the changes we've made, the improvements to the system. Maybe, she conceded, but systems don't inspire people, Major. Stories do. And yours is a good one. The officer who stood her ground with dignity, who endured humiliation without compromising her. Integrity, who helped transform a broken command without seeking revenge or glory. Put that way, I could see the value in allowing my experience to become part of Fort Bragg's evolving story. Not for personal recognition, but because it offered something essential. Hope that standing for what's right, even quietly, even at personal cost, ultimately matters. That evening, I received one final, unexpected communication, an email from Jason Reynolds, now stationed at Fort Hood. Major Carter, it began formally. I wanted you to know that the changes you've helped implement at Fort Bragg are being noticed throughout the Army. There's talk of similar reforms at other bases, including here at Hood. My new CO mentioned your name in a briefing last week, citing Fort Bragg as a model for transparency in housing assignments and promotion recommendations. I'm trying to be part of the solution now, not the problem. It's harder than taking shortcuts, but I sleep better at night. I guess what I'm trying to say is thank you. Not just for exposing what my uncle was doing, but for showing there's a better way forward. Respectfully, Private Reynolds. I sat back in my chair, a sense of completion washing over me. The circle that had begun with that humiliating moment outside my quarters had closed in ways I never could have anticipated. Colonel Reynolds's abuse of power had been exposed and addressed. The system that enabled his corruption was being reformed, and perhaps most surprising of all, his nephew, once the smirking beneficiary of unfair privilege, was finding his way toward a more honorable path. The next morning, I walked across Fort Bragg with new eyes, seeing not just the physical base, but the invisible web of trust, accountability, and integrity that we were rebuilding day by day. Soldiers saluted as I passed, some with the perfunctory respect due my rank, others with a deeper acknowledgement that I'd come to recognize. Respect not just for the oak leaves on my shoulders, but for what I represented in the story of Fort Bragg's transformation. Near the parade ground, I passed my old quarters, now properly assigned to a captain who had earned them through service and merit. The small garden I'd started was still there, tended now by different hands but flourishing in the Carolina sunshine. A group of new recruits marched past, fresh-faced and earnest, their drill sergeant calling cadence with practiced authority. They were entering an army that would always have its flaws, its challenges, its moments of failure. But here at Fort Bragg, at least, they were entering a command that had faced its demons and emerged stronger, more accountable, more true to the values it professed to uphold. And in some small way, I had helped make that possible. Not through grand gestures or heroic stands, but through the quiet dignity of refusing to accept that wrong was right, through trusting that the truth, given space to emerge, would speak for itself. My father had known this, had lived it decades before me, and now, having walked a similar path, I understood more fully what he had tried to teach me, that honor isn't given and can't be taken away. It's proven every day you wear the uniform, in the choices you make when no one is watching, and sometimes when everyone is. Rank may command respect, I murmured, echoing the wisdom my father had passed down to me, but only honor truly earns it. And in that moment, standing in the morning sun at the heart of Fort Bragg, I felt the weight of both, the rank I'd earned and the honor I'd preserved. When it would have been easier to look away, both mattered, both had their place. But I knew without doubt which one would leave the more lasting legacy.